Hey, everybody. Welcome to Publishing Disrupted podcast. I've got David Morris here with me again.
Hello.
And hello.
Yeah, we're real professional podcasters, right on
And
cue.
yeah, no, that's fine. I didn't even prepare you. Basically, let me give you the description here, just in case you don't know what you're in for. We've got Publishing Disrupted is basically exploring the ways in which book publishing is changing and how writers can best meet the challenge. And I'm editor Mick Silva, and that hello is from David Morris, publisher and literary agent. And we're basically two former Christian publishing industry professionals learning to navigate the massive independent book market. And we have a guest today.
Our
We have,
first ever guest.
yes, our first ever author, Cara Meredith, is joining us. Welcome.
Woohoo! So excited to be here.
Really appreciate it, Cara. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
so I've known Cara as literary agent in the last, it's probably been 2 years now, maybe more.
2 or 3 years. I think 3 years.
Yeah. And we knew
hmm
of each other and had met when you published your previous book, The Color of Life,
hmm
with Zondervan when I was the
hmm
publisher there.
hmm
But it's been great. One of the great things about not being a book publisher anymore, the head of a team, is that I've been able to work more
hmm
closely with authors, and
hmm
it's just been great to be more connected to you, Kara, in this instance,
hmm
and to better know your content and your how you relate to it, what you do with it, who you are as a person and a writer. There's been a lot of Zoom calls, and we figured some stuff out and still
Yeah.
figuring it out. And you are most recently the author of Church Camp, Bad Skits, Cry Night, and How White Evangelicalism Betrayed a Generation. And that came out, boy, you're gonna have to remind me. I'm not gonna remember it off the top of my head, in May.
April 29th, 2025.
Right, the end of April. Yeah.
Yes.
And how many days exactly in minutes since
You
it
know,
came out?
she's starting to sleep through the night. She did have a little bit of a recurrence of waking up throughout the night a week or week and a half, 2 weeks ago,
I
when
always do.
a when a particular flagship evangelical publication decided to disrupt her sleep and wake her up.
Yes, let's
Um,
get to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Definitely.
So yeah, the book came out 2.5 months ago. I am largely trying to take this month off, minus a conversation with you and a couple of conversations later in the month.
Good.
But I'm not doing book events this month, just trying to rest a little bit myself.
Yep. And tell us about what your day job is like these days. You're a writer, you're trying to get placed, you're a minister, and you're a book author and a mom and a spouse.
Yeah, I have a few too many jobs, which is not what I hope for the future. But I have what I call my pay the mortgage jobs. So by day, I actually largely work in the nonprofit sector. So I work as a director of development for a small nonprofit that supports mentorship and instruction for young people of color. And then I work in some
That
other
sounds great.
nonprofit. Yes, I truly I believe in that work, and that is it's part of what it's part of what I do, or it's what I do on a part-time basis. And then I do some nonprofit comms work, although that the latter half of that will be ending soon. Um, and so otherwise, the remainder, if I could almost split my week into thirds, is what I do in the writing and ministry sense. I do a lot of outside speaking and preaching, but I'm also in the ordination process with the Episcopal Church. So there's a fair amount that goes into that.
Yeah.
So my long-term goal is to just be a writer and priest. That's what I would love to do. I don't even know if that's in a traditional church setting, or if it's just having licensure, or what it might be. But in the midst of that, I do a fair amount of freelancing. Although right now I am resting and just trying to look at the tomatoes that are growing in my garden. And I will soon hop on a plane and go to a place that has a beach, and I will
Nice.
stare at the ocean for hours. So
Yes.
that is the plan for my life currently.
You're in Oakland, California, so the tomatoes grow really nicely there, I imagine.
Oh, well, we have Oakland is across the bay from San Francisco. So San Francisco, as you may have heard, has this friend called Carl the Fog. June gloom comes in. We're recording in July. So Carl is starting to leave the premises, but we still get a fair amount of fog. Certainly through June, beginning of July. So tomatoes really don't come until August, September. But earlier this spring, excuse me, along with a neighbor, I installed drip irrigation finally.
Ooh,
So the tomatoes now have their own, the tomatoes and other vegetables and flowers have their own watering system. So I will
nice.
be able to leave town for a week and not have to worry about getting someone to water. So these are very exciting things that might come out in a
That's
book,
good.
although I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone would ever really want to read them. So,
Those little
but
things like
yes.
that, those are the exciting developments in life sometimes. Getting a
Oh my
drip,
gosh.
and you think about nothing else. You don't have to think about all the things you normally think about, and just like, how do I grow these tomatoes while I'm away on vacation?
It's
Yes. And
automatic drip
and
feeding.
that if that is all I have to worry about, I mean, I salute myself for that.
There you
So I mean
go.
that's it's commendable.
Well,
Absolutely.
Mick, why don't you pitch the first question for Kara? I will just comment that everything you described about yourself in terms of your professional life, the thirds of this,
Hmm.
day job with not in nonprofit, doing
Hmm.
communications work, writing, preaching, um, that sounds to me like the formula for being a writer. That
Hmm.
sounds like not just in terms of
Yeah.
finding content, but how you make things work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What
Yeah.
comes to your mind, Mick?
So like all the hats that you're wearing, I mean, I think this is
Hmm.
something that comes up a lot in the coaching that I do
Hmm.
for people when they're getting involved in publishing. They typically have at least three jobs, if not more. And these are
Yep.
in professional capacities, but they also bleed over, as we know, into
Hmm.
personal life. And what does even professional and personal look like anymore? We used to talk about work-life balance, and I don't even know what a balance might be other than just that it's all kind of mixed in together. But those are, like we were saying before we started recording, those are the kind of books that increasingly I'm seeing and that I enjoy personally to read. That's life's messy and it's not necessary to try and fix it up and clean it. It's just necessary to kind of orient yourself to that reality.
Hmm.
As we talk about publishing disrupted, there's good disruption and there's bad disruption, and I think a lot of times we place those labels too quickly on what's good and bad. We don't necessarily know what.
Hmm.
And so I guess my question after that long preamble is how do you navigate? The original question would be how do you pursue, I guess, work-life balance? But
Hmm.
since that's kind of a meaningless question, I almost just want to ask, like, how do you live your life now being a professional author? And I mean, you introduced us to, some of the things you're pursuing. I mean, Episcopal priest, that sounds amazing. And I know the ordination process is extensive, so it does bleed into your personal life, but
Hmm.
your mom as well, and looking always at your life as fodder, like grist for the
Hmm.
mill for your books, right? I mean, like we all do if we write. How do you manage that?
Yeah. Well, I do think that the work-life balance is sometimes is a false reality. I don't know if any of us really have it. Or can really achieve it. I really believe in boundaries. So I'm a huge fan, for instance, of not this is my cell phone. I'm not really looking at it, although I did text my son earlier to be sure to feed the dog. But I don't have email on my phone. So I have very high boundaries for myself, partially because I know that if I am seeking to work between 8 and 4 every day, then between 4 and 8 the other third of the day, I'm going to be on the soccer field. I'm going to be riding bikes, whatever it is, and I want to be as present as I can. So within my work week, I do block scheduling as much as I can. So typically I
Great.
have Monday, Wednesdays are for my development job. Tuesday, Thursdays are for my other job, which that'll be changing soon. So I am trying to figure out what is going to go on that third leg of the stool. And then Fridays tend to be my main writing day. So I try to do that, but then a lot of times if I'm able to get my work done, I might fill the extra 2 hours with individual writing. So um, all that to say, I instill boundaries. I'm a big fan of deadlines, not because I actually want them, but because if I have a deadline, I will actually get it done. So
Absolutely.
in the book writing process, I know that if I need to write 60,000 words, I can't just say, all right, the book is due on December 1st. I need to break it up into individual
Yeah.
chapters, and that helps me know. So it's the same with freelancing articles, or if I have a grant due for my job. I put boundaries in place in different ways because that oftentimes acts as an internal motivator for me. But then on the other hand, I also recognize, okay, I need to have rest. And so this month, as much as I mean, if y'all could see my desk, these are all middle of the night ideas. They're different
Post-it notes.
ideas that
You're
have
holding up
come.
post-it notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm holding up. Oh yeah, I forget people can't see this. Uh, I'm someone who I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning almost every day, not because I want to, but because my body's just like, it's really fun to wake up at 2 in the morning. So I wake up, and a lot of times an idea will come to me. So I have a post-it note and a pen right by my bed, and I write those down. All that to say, I've got a stack of post-it notes on my desk of things I want to write. And this month, I realized that I am tired from releasing a book, as that has been the priority, was largely the priority in May and June. And so I'm resting and I'm letting the post-it notes rest until August 1st.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to take time off and build room into my schedule for that. But that also means that I have to recognize how that affects our budget. Okay, well then I'm not going to have this extra money that's coming in from freelancing. So
Right.
it's the juggling the three-legged stool. I recognize I'm not giving you a linear answer, but there's not really a linear answer to the question,
Yeah.
because juggling the three-legged stool it is a constant juggling. So
Mhm.
yeah, but
Mhm.
it's also what gives me life. I don't know if I could have just one. I think I've told David this before. I don't think I could just have one job. I actually appreciate having a myriad of part-time jobs. I think if I were a full-time writer, it wouldn't be okay. I'd be in my head all the time. So that's part of for me, that's part of the pursuit of priest and writer, is knowing that the priestly side of it is also going to come with a fair amount of people time. And the writerly side of it is that time that I need to think and process and be with my words.
It's really good.
That's a great last point there too. Just to say you're going to be a writer full time all day long.
Yeah,
Well, that's actually not possible. What do you have to write about? I mean, you can write about things, you
yeah,
can make things up, or you can even just notice things and write a lot about them. But you
sure.
still have to have a life to live to understand
Hmm.
and process and to
Yeah.
find source for the writing. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't think most writers, I mean, I think it's so easy for folks who are starting out to have an aspiration to just be the one thing. They're like, okay, I want to be a writer, and I want to, excuse me, I want to do that full time. Um, I'm sitting here at my desk looking at, there's right on top, there's a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, The Serviceberry, which was largely an essay. There's even a note on top of it about an essay I want to write. See, it's another one of those midnight revelations. But
That's a
I think
short
it's easy
book,
to,
right?
it's a
By the way,
very, yeah, it's actually based
in terms of word
on an,
count.
yeah, on an essay she gave. So it's not as dense, certainly. But I think it's easy to say, oh, I want to be Robin Wall Kimmerer when I grow up. But that's also to place expectations upon who Robin Wall Kimmerer is. And the reality is that she's a scientist and a professor and a writer. So in the same way, she's got
Hmm.
her own three-legged stool that she is juggling. So I think it's easy to believe that there's this idyllic scenario, but I think it's true for most writers and or for those of us in publishing that oftentimes we do and are constantly identifying our three legs. And then it's a matter of realizing that sometimes different legs get different attentions.
Yes, yes. Emphases. Yeah, I love that answer because yeah, we're not big on linear here. We jump around a lot. We come back and circle back, and I
Hmm.
think that that's the kind of writing I'm trying to describe too. We talked about Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Annie Dillard's sort of
Hmm.
vision of a pond, right? And the
Hmm.
bugs and the fish in it and the birds that congregate. People come around a pond, and I even think a book as a metaphor,
Yeah.
as that pond that people come around and take what they need from it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Reverie. I was just reading Robert Brown Taylor's essay today, excuse me, on Substack about reverie, and that's her word for it, the uselessness
Hmm.
that we have to cultivate in the midst of all the things that we're trying to get done and being
Hmm.
useful and productive and American, all these
Hmm. Hmm.
concepts that we have. It would be nice to simplify that, but in a
Hmm.
way, I really think that's the opposite of that kind of broad, expansive life that we're looking for, and not just
Hmm.
as writers and publishers, but as people, as humans
Hmm.
in this world. So it's
Hmm.
really restorative to me to think of it that way, and not to think about going from point A to point B. So as an editor,
Hmm.
I have to do that all day long, but the rest of my
Hmm.
life, I can kind of just be free to be disorderly.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Well,
that
and oh, sorry, go ahead,
go,
David.
go ahead. Well, go ahead. Go ahead. You're the guest, Cara. You go.
Oh, well, this is what happens on podcasts is that I just start. I'll fill space.
Mhm.
I'll fill space if you need me to. Um, I mean, I think about I love Annie Dillard. She's one of my favorites. And in the same along the same lines as Reverie, she says, choir the proper praise.
Yeah,
So what does it mean in all these areas of our lives and or in the three main identifying parts of our lives to choir the proper praise toward I don't want to use the phrase calling just because
right.
for obvious reasons, but for that which we have chosen to emphasize within our three legs, but then to honor those things. And I think about the artistry that comes in and with writing, and it's so easy to get caught up in what we think we as writers and what we think we should do with constantly putting out information and filling on social media and writing a Substack post X amount of times a week. And and the reality is that if we do that, we're losing our ability to choir the proper praise. We're just feeding the cycle instead of honoring um, who we really are and what we should be doing and the work and the beauty that comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of segues into the question I wanted to ask, and that is, I think, Mick, in my experience, being in large evangelical publishing, working for a very large publisher, big budget,
Yeah.
big expectations, financial expectations on all books, there's a lot of books that there isn't that sort of artistry and that balance going on, that deeper
Mm-hmm.
sort of way of noticing and describing things. It's a lot of pastor books that sound a lot alike after a while,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
women's interest books, bloggers books, um, and a lot of those. I can't tell you how. There was three books once that were published on the topic of shame on the same day, and they all had the same title. If you want to go look that, if I mean, I'll leave out the exact title, but it just goes to show you how much of a machine it is. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Needed
you,
books,
Cara,
actually.
sorry, Mick.
Needed books. In many ways, they found audiences that needed them. But yeah,
Right. Yeah.
the point
Mm-hmm.
being, there's many of those
Right,
books.
right. And I'm not trying to pick on the topic of shame. No doubt that's something that needs addressing. Um, but so much of it was platform driven too. So
Mm-hmm.
many of those authors, as publisher, I would look at the proposal and my eyes would go right to the social media platform. Whereas Mick is like, David, first you got to like understand what this is about. And we always had that exciting tension. But you, Cara, you went from publishing your first book with this same large publisher, evangelical publisher,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of things seemingly were built in, or maybe certain expectations were built in. Now you're with a what you might call a more broad-shouldered, more progressive, but still spiritual slash religious publisher
Mhm.
with your current book, Church Camp. Talk about like what you thought one was and what you thought the next one would be, or talk about how the experience is different now. I know there's some things in there with regard to like, well, publishing is never what you think it is, and you have to figure things out for yourself as an author. But just talk about like, there's a tension there. I know you experience it in very specific examples of working within the large and highly populated evangelical field versus being a little more now on the margins and maybe a little more authentic and so on.
Mm, that's good.
Yeah. Sorry, I drank my water. I thought you were going to keep
Sure.
making comments. Um, yeah, I think there are so many ways to answer this question.
Yeah.
Um, going so when my first book, I got my first book deal. That would have, gosh, I guess it was 2017 because the book then published in early 2019. So as a first time author, I didn't necessarily know what to expect. I just knew that this large evangelical publisher was offering me more money, much more money, than a couple of the other smaller houses that the book had been up against. But I also knew that there was an editor I really, really wanted to work with at said large publisher. And so even though within my first book, there were things that were great. There were also things that were really, really not a fit. Um, and even my book, I think one could very quickly argue that my first book was not a great fit for that publisher. My first book was more of a pet project. And even though I am proud of the words that I wrote, the reality is that I think at that time the publisher didn't know what to do with my book. They didn't know how to properly market it. It didn't fall within that genre of typical books that they were putting out, both books by women writers, but also at that time it was really one of the first books on the theme of racial justice, and they really didn't know what to do with that. And so for me, being at a large publisher, it was an okay situation, but I didn't have the platform. There were things that I didn't have that I think they probably thought would naturally carry the book, and so it didn't. So for me, with my second book, I actually didn't have the opportunity or the chance to even be with them again. And by that time, I think I had my own belief system. I had gotten more secure in my own belief system and didn't want to jump through the hoops of what it felt like more stringent hoops. I did want to be with a publisher that was more in alignment with my own theology and or my own belief system that way. But the reality is that I didn't there weren't a lot of opportunities outside of small publishing houses. And so I remember, I don't know how much you remember this, David, but 3 years ago, we were pitching around the idea that would eventually become church camp. But for me, I had to have almost this come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better word or phrase. And I remember spending long hours with my friend Kelly Nickendaya. She's an amazing author, liberation theologian. And the reality is that Kelly is soon releasing her fourth book. Kelly is still a very small author, but she writes because she wants to write. She doesn't write because she's hoping to land on the New York Times bestseller list. She writes because she has words that are buried in her soul that need to come out and a story that needs to be told. So both she and her agent aren't looking to garner this deal that's going to that's going to make either one of them thousands upon tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, she's going, okay, I hope I pay back my advance with this book. That would be great. And so
Hmm.
so Kelly and I 3 years ago, we came to the place in which she said, you need to identify why you're writing. You need to ask yourself, are you writing because you want to be famous? Are you writing because you want to earn a lot of money? Are you writing because you can't not write? Are you writing? And she literally like went through this list of five or six things. And finally, I was like, I'm just writing because I want to write. I want to get a second book out. I don't really care. And maybe that's not the attitude to have, but I wanted to release a second book. I wanted to write because I could not write. I could not write. Am I saying that
Hmm.
correctly?
Hmm.
I had to write. So um, for me, the second publisher hasn't entirely been rosy or perfect. I also knew going into it that no situation was going to be perfect. That I was probably going to need to do a lot more marketing on my own, for instance, because their team was only so small. But in that way, I was also just like, I I wrote another book.
There
Someone
you go.
believed in my words enough to publish another book. What? And this is where you just throw out all the expletives in the world. What an expletive honor. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good
You can
answer.
use expletives on our podcast, by the way.
I wasn't we didn't talk about this before we started recording. So that's
Yeah,
why I'm like, okay.
David does it all the time, so you know it's
Okay. Well
yeah.
then I'm free next time to expletive.
Indeed, indeed.
Uh,
Let's do that's a great answer. Yeah, I can only think of in the big publishing machine, people are publishing for a lot of other reasons than what you just said about just wanting to write and writing a second book.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's motivated by a lot of layers of other things, without a doubt. Especially in nonfiction religious publishing, there's a lot of else going on when people are putting out a book. And if I may, Mick, let me follow up that question. Cara, you talked about publisher and author and how to get word out about the book. And it's true. I mean, we had an author at our previous publisher who said to me, it took me a long time, David, to realize that the publisher only does so much to market a book. And that this is a person who's like on his fifth or sixth book.
Hmm.
But we were working with him on helping him, leverage what he can do on his own as well. That's part of our role, I think, as publishers these
Hmm.
days, is to enable authors, not to
Hmm.
necessarily make it happen for them. Um, and I think that's where publishers are really falling short, really, is there really ought to be more author coaching from publishers. There ought to be more platforms coaching and support from publishers,
Hmm.
helping authors grow their email lists,
Yeah.
because publishers have the staff and they have the expertise to pass that wisdom on, but they're not doing it all that much. They're doing a
Yeah.
publicity effort, some paid ads, and hopefully good sales and distribution. Um,
Hmm.
but but I've noticed as your agent how much you've been doing, and I'm not trying to, we love your current publisher. That's not the issue here, but you've been really putting yourself out there, which also is exhausting and why you need a break right now. And you're doing this podcast here with us as well. But I've noticed you doing a really great job with, reposting things that you see online, adding value to those posts, not just sort of posting, "Hey, look at this," but saying why this post is important. I know that you also have gotten a lot of media, and I know that you know why you got a lot of media, and I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think it also talks about that writerly side of you, that the professional writing part that you're trying to cultivate.
Yeah. Um, well, I think so much of it, and this might go back to my former existence as someone in full-time ministry, which is what I did for a good portion of my grown-up life, before becoming a three-legged writer. But it all boils down to relationships. And so when I left full-time ministry and or just the full-time workforce, traditional workforce, I guess I should say, um, I I really sought to cultivate relationships within the writing world. And part of that had to do with my own personality. I'm an extrovert. I thrive off and on people. I mean, it's one of those, I know that about myself. Um, but I also knew that if I was going to write a book or release a book, I had to have the support of people around me. So fast forward to this book, and I've had, I mean, I have a little Excel doc with all the people that I feel like I've connected with and or that have supported me and or that I've supported. So for a while I was doing an IG live series, Instagram live series, and just kept inviting authors on, and we would have a conversation about their books. And for me, I just thought, well, if I'm supporting you, you can potentially support me. We're friends now. So it's I mean it's that side of things. But when it came to then releasing this book, it was a matter of identifying people that I had been in relationship, but also publications. So all of the publications that I've been writing for and saying, okay, here's the editor, and I have a relationship with this editor, send them a book. So for Church Camp, the book that just came out, the publisher, my publisher, did do they did what they could, which I mean, and again, this is not to throw them under the bus by any means. I think that they're limited in staffing, and there's only so much they can do, and that's where authors have the opportunity to leverage what they can do. And so a lot of the press I've gotten has been not necessarily from their relationships, but it's been from my relationships and people that known. The people that I've known includes both writers and editors at specific publications. So one of the things, I don't know if I should give this away, but one of the things I did to every single writer friend that I felt like that first of all that I felt like was going to receive this book well, I did not reach out to everyone, of whom, especially those of whom I knew would probably feel attacked by the phrase "how white evangelicalism betrayed a generation." I did not send it to some of those folks, but to those that I really felt like would be able to hold a nuanced perspective and read the book and receive the book. I emailed and I just said, "Hey, I've got a book coming out, and I would love it if you could support me in one of two ways. Would you either feature it on Instagram or would you feature it on Substack? If you featured on Instagram, would you do a post or invite me to do an IG live? If you featured on Substack, would you either would you feature an excerpt? Would you do a Q&A, or would you write something on your own?" So I was very specific in what I asked people to do.
That's what we
And
would
there
call
were,
an influencer mailing from the author, where you're
oh,
contacting influencers. That's another way of saying something is an influencer mailing.
I'm so glad to hear there's an official word for it. I
Sorry to
just
keep
called it
interrupt. Yeah.
emailing people.
Yeah,
No,
you
but
got out there.
yeah, but it's a matter. I think that so many times authors can be I find so many people who don't want to market themselves. And that's where I just go, well, it's not about marketing. And I mean, do you want to sell books? Yeah. Then tell people what you wrote. I mean, and I recognize that because that is so much of where I was actually with my first book.
Yeah.
When it came to my social media channels, I just go, what was I doing? I probably could have sold so many more books if I had just like put, the book out there so much more than I did. But I think at that point, I either didn't want to cross boundary lines, or I was still scared of letting people know my truth. I mean, I think there was a myriad of different things. And this time I was just like, church camp, come on, come on. And so in that way, it had there were people who said no. There were people who said, nope, I can't do it right now. People who said, nope, it's actually not the right fit of a book for me. People, as in both editorial boards and humans. But there were also a whole lot of people who said yes, and who needed the options of what to do, and who then said, okay, yeah, send me an excerpt. I'd love to do this.
Yeah.
And in that way, the press has been largely positive,
That's
which
good.
might lead you into your next question, David or Mick.
Why don't you field that question, Mick?
I
Play ball,
I
Mick
love that
Silva.
answer because it's open ended, and it's what I love. Because you had to figure out. I mean, you weren't thinking influencer email. We weren't thinking I'm going to go market my book today. It's more, hey, I'm going to connect with my friends. I'm going to let them know that there's this book potentially that could even help them grow their audience. Right?
Well
You're
said.
serving them. You're not
Yeah.
serving yourself. I think we just get into our headspace as writers so often. And you mentioned being an extrovert. I'm an avowed introvert, and I get really
Hmm.
scared and shy, even about books that I have worked on personally. They're not even my book. I'm like, oh, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to ask. It's that inhibition. I think just that reflexive, like be humble kind of inhibition that I was taught, and I have to unlearn now. I realize I'm
Mm,
actually serving an audience in a better way if I can put it in front of more people. That's not
hmm.
being a salesy, weird person. That's just being human.
I'm
Yeah.
always amazed too. Let me jump in for a second, Mick. I'm always amazed that when I do work on uh, getting endorsements for books in the publishing role I play, I'm always amazed at how many people actually do show up. You know,
Mm,
if we put out like 10 or 15 requests, we get about an 80% or 75% response with an
hmm.
endorsement, usually on time, even if it's limited to as little as 4 weeks. People want to be connected to good content. They
Mm,
want to support the folks that they know. They know what's involved in these projects, and they also know it can come back around for them as well. And we
mm,
do
hmm.
at Lake Drive Books, we do try to link back to anybody who gives us an endorsement just from our modest website. But I think people want to help you as you put out a book, and that's something important for authors to know.
Mm,
That's good. Yeah, that's right. So piggybacking off of that, making the ask and learning to do that, it probably, I'm assuming for an extrovert, isn't that much of a stretch, right? You're already kind of in the space of I'd like to connect with these people. That gives me a dopamine hit to kind of like make that connection. For myself, it doesn't. It's more of a
mm,
reach. And I think
mm,
for for most of my life, maybe as an editor, especially, but even before this, like just making those asks was a really difficult thing. And I work with a lot
mm,
of people who have at least an introverted inhibition kind of response to this work, and would prefer the bigger publisher for that reason
mm,
because they think the publisher is going to give them more marketing. And David and I
mm,
are always trying to disavow, of that notion. It's not true. I don't know that it has been true for many years now. It's really a
mhm,
difficult thing. You need the author to be someone who's a bit more extroverted and evangelistic about their book.
mhm,
Doing that authentically is always the question that I have. And so for authors, when
mm,
I'm trying to help them navigate that world after the writing process, obviously, but in concurrent with it, it's a question I have for authors who have done that, especially with two books now. Looking back at the first experience you had, where it was largely on the publisher, at least in your mind, to do it, and then
mhm.
now where it's like you have to be a bit scrappier. I like David's word; he uses scrappy a lot. You have to be scrappy as independent publishers and producers of good content, right? Substack, I think, helps because it is a network and it feels
Mhm,
more like an incubator of goodness rather than
mhm,
just this exploitative, extractive thing that can feel like on Instagram or even Facebook, um,
mhm,
taking rather than giving. But like for a lot of authors, I think they need that brain switch to go in
mhm,
the brains and to say, okay, how can I make this more authentic? How can I feel good about what I'm putting out there and make
mhm.
that ask authentically? I mean, do you help people in that regard at all? I mean, newer authors to figure out how to navigate that?
Well, Mick, I would love to. So, if anyone wants to hire me, I am around. Um, no, I mean, I think I've certainly I've done a fair amount of coaching, just as I've done a fair amount of editing, in the past. I love coaching and walking alongside authors, just like both of you. Um, and so I hold that as something that I do love. I think a lot of this, yes, it does have to do, or I think it is accentuated by my personality, but I think also it's part of it. This is so much of my own vocational training too, both in the past, but I mean, again, now as director of development, part of my job, I mean, my job is to raise funds. It is to bring in money, and whether I am bringing in money via foundations and grant writing or through private donors or whatever the medium, my job is to ask. I mean, it's to ask for money, but my job is to ask and to invite. So I think there's a part of it, there's a place that there's a place in the back of my mind where I just go, well, don't take it personally. The least they can do is say no.
Right.
And I recognize how much that was part of my own training when it came to learning how to ask for money in the nonprofit sector 20 plus years ago in full-time ministry. And it was so scary at first, but I just look at it now and I go, okay, like don't take it personally. And I think that's like just ask. So, I mean, just yesterday, I emailed another author that I know has had my book for a couple of months now, that I have connected with, who started to follow me on Substack, who yada, yada, yada. We can go down the list. And I just said, hey, author who will remain unnamed on this publishing podcast right now. I said, hey, would you like to do a swap? And I'll feature an excerpt of your book and you can feature an excerpt of mine. And I don't know, she hasn't written back yet, but the least she can do is say no. But I know that she likes me enough to receive my emails in her inbox. So all that to say, I really appreciate what both of you are saying. I think it's easy for me to just be like, well, just ask. And I forget that different personalities and or realities exist. And so this excites me in the sense of thinking about, well, how might I apply what I'm naturally doing, which I oftentimes again just attribute to my own personality, but how might I expand this across the board to different personalities, to different experiences, lived experiences, to say, okay, how can we do this so that we do have a positive experience when we are releasing a book into the world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe ask me to follow up with me in 3 months and see what's developed.
I think
Yeah.
for all you've done, you even as an extrovert, if that's probably not a complete label for you,
Yeah.
Cara, but even as an extrovert, it's still exhausting to put yourself out there. It's still work, and
Yeah.
yeah. But that's part of the game plan. Well, we've been hinting at it. Let's get to that. Let's get to that article that was written recently about your book. So
Dun dun dun.
there's a mainstream Christianity magazine out there. At least it pretends to represent mainstream Christianity. That's a word I like to use, mainstream, not mainline. So there's a hint right there. It's not
Yes.
mainline, it's
Mm-mm.
mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Evangelical, which isn't necessarily mainstream. I have one author who calls it extremism hiding in plain sight. But so in the theme of this podcast, and then we want to really let you go. In the theme of this podcast, Publishing Disrupted, talk about like you didn't seek that particular review personally. I don't know. You can comment on that. But it happened, and maybe without having to explain everything that went on, and then people can go look for themselves. Um, but what was the feelings that you went through in that process?
Yeah. Well, it was really, so I'll say there have been, I think they were the eighth or ninth of like press that put out reviews on the book. And the previous, again, 7 or 8 publications all had really positive things to say. Um, which maybe it's hard for me to tell this story without giving a lot of the background, but
Right.
so initially my publisher sent, I mean, when you're releasing a book, you send books out to various media outlets. So this publication was on the list along with a number of other publications. And we looked at that and I remember thinking, well, we'll see what happens. But for me, there were two things going into it. First of all, and this publication that picked it up owes no allegiance to me, but I did used to write profusely for them. I wrote over 30 articles for them, really up until probably, I want to say my last article came out with them probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Wow.
So I thought, the main editor who would be assigning this book, he knows me because I've written for him.
Wow.
So I think that I had a little bit of an expectation of nuance, that
Mhm.
there might be nuance that would happen or that would take place. I also knew that this publication had read and reviewed books that were within this vein. So I remember John Ward's testimony, and his subtitle. I can't remember what it was, but it also involved white evangelicalism, the betrayal and white evangelicalism. So I thought, well, they held a nuanced point of view when they critiqued Ward's book, but it was again nuanced. And I think the other thing that went into it, I thought the I mean I write book reviews, and to me there's a pretty standard format, that maybe it isn't followed everywhere, but for the most part, if you're going to write a book review, you highlight three things and one piece of constructive criticism. And if you don't have something nice to say, you're not the reviewer for the book. And this may be something, I mean, maybe that's me just not, maybe that's my own naivete, although I see Mick nodding his head in agreement. For the most part, that is what I have experienced and the expectation that is given to me. And so when this particular flagship evangelical publication published a review and essentially threw my book under the bus, not only was the reviewer that was assigned the review, they held it a huge conflict of interest. They shouldn't have been reviewing the book in the first place. But it also was one of those, it was just like, what are they doing? Then it just feels like they're just trying to create division. They're just trying to get hits. They're just trying to get attention. The reality though is that and you said this, David, from early on. When I saw the review, I was like, oh, but I knew from the get-go, this is actually going to draw attention to my book. And I have to look at it in that way. I also knew reading the review, I was like, she has completely misunderstood the book.
Mhm.
Which just goes back to point A, she shouldn't have written the review in the first place. So
Yeah, yeah.
I realize there are so many things that can be said, but I think that I have chosen to camp out in the land of, well, this actually is drawing quite a bit of attention to the book. Um, as I told both of you before we started recording, the only thing that really made me go, oh, no, you didn't, was then a week later when they featured the review, not even the book, but they featured the review on their weekly podcast.
Mm.
And I was like, why are you doing that? You're like, this just feels you're lowballing the situation. You're not even reading the book and highlighting that. You are reading one reviewer's perspective and riffing off of that. Like you're not actually making yourselves look very good here. So
Yeah.
that was the piece that just made me go, sugar burger, expletive, expletive. But also, I mean, then going back to point A, I think it was the timing in which all of this happened. It happened right as I was saying, all right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take July off. It also made me realize, I am probably taking this a little more. I'm not personally, but this is an invitation for me to take a break and a
Mm.
breather, because it is coming on the edge of me just already being tired, and so I'm going to read into this, and I don't need to do that. I just need to let it go. I just need to sing
Yeah.
a little Frozen and let it go.
I remember a book, David, that we did just before everything went down and we left. That we both, independently of each other, I think, decided that this was not a book that we wanted to have our names associated with. And it was just, I mean, this happens a lot in publishing where you
Mhm.
assume that you're furthering a relationship that you kind of have to do because you're representing the house and you do what you got to do. You suck
Mhm.
it up, right? But the contentiousness, the
Mm,
flagrant feeling that this person was always um, going for the lowest hanging fruit and trying to make
mm,
problems and trying to
mhm,
be just contentious, honestly. And I it makes me think of what you're dealing with now. And there is this I'd say it's an evil spirit, but that's the
Mm,
only. It's just it's a human
mm,
nature thing. I'm remembering Karen Swallow Prior has a
mm,
great phrase, 5 word phrase I always go back to that is in evangelicalism on her book on evangelicalism,
mhm.
what it's called, but it'll come to me after we record. Her statement is opposition farming yields abundant crops.
Mm,
And that is what we see so much on
mhm.
social media, and you can see that that is a pattern, not just with you know social media, but particularly Christians, and I would say
Yeah,
particularly evangelical Christians. It's very lucrative to get people upset about the worldliness that is coming to get them,
yeah,
and I always make fun of it because I like to bring it down to grassroots level, but it's like the robots are stealing your medicine and you got to
yeah.
get angry about it, right? And it's
But
like, give me a break.
and it's also business. It's also business.
It's like, it's good
And I
business.
think
That's
that's what we're navigating these days is um, like whether it's detaching from the Christian industrial complex, which includes churches on the local level,
Mm-hmm.
or if
a good
it's
point.
or if it's trying to go, hey, this negative review came out from a major media publication. I need to just detach from that for my mental health. That I mean
Mm-hmm.
that's a dynamic we're all kind of dealing with right now. Like I need to
Mm-hmm.
not pay attention to this, and I need to
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to my family, my kids, having
Mm-hmm.
energy to cook dinner tonight. And I'm not, yeah, yeah, for any of us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that, yeah, I think that just what you've experienced really accentuated it. Which
Mm-hmm.
it's also made a little more poignant by the fact that you used to write for this publication, which I did not really realize.
Oh yeah.
A lot of that sounds like a lot of placements with them, and like, okay, there's no sort of like nod to, or there's no benefit of the doubt here. You
Oh
know,
yeah. No,
maybe
I
that
mean they
person
yeah.
didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
Well, and again, and for the most part, I mean, I did finally, I was still getting this publications. I'm trying not to name them, as if the world doesn't know who they are by this
Yeah.
point, especially when we link to it in the show notes.
Let's not neither bash it nor dignify it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're just not going to give them space. But um, now I'm forgetting. Never mind. I'm forgetting what I was going to say. But yeah, no, I mean, that's who I started. That's who got me on the map with freelancing. Um, 100% was writing
Wow.
for them.
Yeah.
And for a number, I mean, I think I wrote for probably 5 or 6 different departments. So I was writing really prolifically for them, really up until COVID and then up until the pandemic. And then I probably had 2 or 3 articles after the pandemic. But
Hmm.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It
But now
was,
you're in a more spacious mind, more spacious
Yeah, I mean,
spirit.
well, and in the same, I mean, the thing is that even if theologically I was at a different spot when I was writing for this place, I still knew how to speak and write evangelical. But I think, and this could be an entirely different episode, I was so desperate to get published. I was so desperate to have publishing cred that that I was like, well, yeah, I'm just gonna I'm gonna publish with them. This matters. This matters. Um, and and they're what I think also this place has, I think they have redefined who they are. I think they used to be much more ecumenically minded, and they very much have driven themselves into the evangelical ecosphere, and that is largely where they reside, to the point again of division, and of strife almost. But yeah, I think I wasn't. I think when I just wanted my name out there, and I just wanted again, I wanted the publishing cred that came with having, with that. Yeah, I guess I'm losing my train of thought here,
No,
but
that's okay.
yeah,
Well, why don't
yeah.
we end on this, if I may, Mick? What
Oh,
would you say? What would you say to writers, or say to yourself when you were so desperate to get published? That's a
yeah,
hard
Mick.
one, but what would you say? What would you say in terms of finding that more authentic three-legged
Mm,
rider kind of existence? Do they need these big cred? Do they need these big bylines? or is there something else out there? Oh, this is over to you, Cara.
Oh, I thought you said to Mick.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, sorry.
No,
Oh,
I'm thinking about it too though, because I
Who
used
would
to be an
you?
oh,
acquiring editor. So yeah, I think that's different when you're going for a big house than you are like with a smaller house now, right? You have more freedom.
yeah. I mean, I so a big reason why I really sought out publication with them is because I thought it would really help with my book.
Mhm.
With when this was prior to my first book coming out. So I was writing prolific. I mean, I was writing weekly at one point for them. Um, and in the end, I don't know if it really helped. I don't think that it actually helped me. I mean maybe it did because it showed I could work with an editor. I feel like that's, or at least that's always the language that is used, because I learned how to then work with various editors when they, critiqued my work. Um, but I don't know if that particular publishing cred really meant a whole lot. And so, yeah,
That's interesting. Yep.
yeah. I guess I just have, I mean, I like, yeah, I look at now, it's interesting. Like, I'll read bios of people and I'll see where they have published. And I think now, because of at least of where this publishing, like this media place, where they have landed, there it comes with certain, I don't know, it comes with certain stereotypes
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if I mean, it might still be in my bio. I'm not sure, but um, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to show that I've written for them now, is the reality.
Right. Yeah, I'm very careful around certain audiences about even mentioning where I've worked.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Yeah, there's associations, and you don't know what you're stepping into. But I mean, there's so many strings attached with those kinds of, I guess, just agreements that you're making. And I'd much
Hmm.
rather agree with the reality that it's messy, and you know
Hmm.
Yeah.
that nobody's like fully in a box, even if they're wanting to believe they're in a box. Like that,
Hmm.
there's no box, man. Stop trying to
And,
fit in the box.
and we've all been there. We've all made those. We've all like we needed jobs in publishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wound up at a big publisher where, well, we were kind of feeding a machine, and it was not always what we wanted, and not always who we thought we were. And did we
Hmm.
need to do that to be where
Yeah.
we are today? It's a complicated.
It is.
There's probably a
Yeah.
lot of trade-offs we maybe didn't need to make.
Hmm.
But then there
Mm.
are things that we found out too that maybe we could not have figured out on our own. So which is it?
Hmm.
There is
Yeah.
that wonderful sort of self-regard that you have to recognize where you're being complicit in things,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
where now that requires you to be responsible to platform other people rather than
Mm.
yourself first, and say, I'm going to get ahead in this way because I'm going to agree with this particular theology or something. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Mm.
I'm going to say, for whatever that was worth, I suppose being complicit had its place and time in my life, but I do regret it.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
am actively trying to um, right some wrongs now
Hmm.
for that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, as much as we can, platform
Hmm.
other people.
Thank you,
But yeah,
Kara.
yeah,
Thank you
thanks
so
for being.
much.
This is so good.
I love that we said we were going to talk for half an hour or so, and it's
Yeah.
been an hour and 10 minutes since we
Yeah.
first jumped on the call. So
Yeah.
have
Thank
fun
you.
editing this,
Yeah,
but
Yeah. I
it's been a
know.
joy. Thank
We
you
could
both.
easily have gone into a lot of different things too.
So many rabbit trails.
More and a little bit more in depth. There's a lot
Yeah.
of overlapping ground here. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thanks for being here.